Good day, everyone. I am Shiela Encabo, an intern criminology student of STI West Negros University. And today I will share with you and discuss to you what is personal identification and why fingerprint is the most reliable in personal identification. But first, let us define what is personal identification. Personal identification. So when we say personal, it is your belonging or relating to a particular person or in a thing. In short, ito ay ang iyong pagmamayari. When we say naman identification, it is the act of identifying someone or something. In short, personal identification is a system of recognizing and identifying a particular person based on his or her characteristics as we differentiate from others. So we can identify a person through gait, or it is the manner of walking of a person, its facial features, cheloscopy or the lips of a person, voice, DNA, odontology, and etc. So, let's proceed to what is fingerprint. So, fingerprint is the impression designed by the first joint of the fingers and thumb on a smooth surface through a media of ink, sweat, or any substance that is capable of producing visibility. But the question is, saan ideally makikita ang fingerprint ng buong buo ng isang tao? So, the answer is sa mga smooth surface, just like baso, screen of your phones, and crystals. And saan naman makikita yung mga permanent fingerprint? They are usually found on paper, even though you cannot see the fingerprint, but once you will apply or treated by ninhydrin method, the fingerprint will be visible. We also have, or meron tayong iba't ibang fingerprint. So, meron tayong Latin print, or what we call invisible, that is mostly found in the crime scene. Next, we have the patent print. At ito naman ang visible at lastly, the impressed print, or mostly called as the plastic print, and it is mostly seen in the clay, soap, wherein makikita ang fingerprint. So, fingerprint is or are the oldest and most accurate methods of identifying individuals. Remember that no two people, not even identical twins, have the same fingerprints. And it is extremely easy for even the most accomplished criminals to leave incriminating fingerprints at the crime scene of a crime. So, Sir Edward Richard Henry, he is the father of modern fingerprint because he is the first person who developed the Henry system of classification at Scotland Yard, and which was accepted by almost of all English speaking country. So we also have Marcelo Malpighi. He is the grandfather of fingerprint, and he originated the term loops and spirals. Fingerprint has three principles, which are the principle of individuality, principle of infallibility, and lastly, the principle of permanency. But let us first define what is the principle of individuality. So, according to Dr. Johann Christoph Andreas Mayer, German anatomist, and was the first to state that fingerprints are never duplicated in two persons. And now let us define what is the principle of individuality or individuality or the variation. So it states that no two persons have the same fingerprints according to the statistic probability. So it states that wala daw tao na magkaparehos yung fingerprint even though the identical twins because each of us has unique fingerprints, kaya it was called as principle of individuality. And he was supported by Sir Francis Galton. He developed the arc, loop, and the whirl pattern as the general classification and identify and publish the 9 types of patterns. So as to the origin, Perkin-G was the first invented the 9 types of patterns. Kaso, mas nauna lang talaga si Galton mag-publish. Kaya, siya yung una. So, he first established a Civil Bureau of Personal Identification. And he is also the inventor of what we call dermatographics. And he also said that the possibility of the two prints being alike was 1.64 billion% only. And he also introduces the World Association test. The next principle is the principle of infallibility. So, according to Dr. Henry Folds, he is a surgeon at Shukiji, Tokyo, Japan, who claimed that gamit lang daw ang fingerprint, makikilala natin ang offender o ang taong nag-commit ng crime provided na dapat mahuli muna, or a manual of practical dactyloscopy. So, let us define what is the principle of infallibility. So, principle of infallibility is a fingerprint is a positive and reliable means of identification. It cannot be easily be forged. So, when we say infallibility means never wrong. So, ibig sabihin, hindi nagkakamali kahit kailan. So, when we say principle of infallibility, kapag nakuha mo yung fingerprint ng isang tao, at kapag na-study mo na yung fingerprint na yun, hindi nagkakamali yung fingerprint in identifying that person or a particular criminal that is involved in the crime scene. So, the last principle of fingerprint is the principle of permanency. So, according to Hermann Wilker, a German anatomist and anthropologist who was born in Jeshin, the Wilker's basal angle was named after him. It is the inferior angle of the parietal bone. So, si Wilker ay nakakabilib na tao. You know what? Because nag-aksaya siya ng napakatagal na panahon just to took his own fingerprint twice with a lapse of, imagine 41 years, and show that ridges formation remains the same during the 1856 and 1897. So imagine kung gaano katagal niya inilaan ang panahon just to identify some fingerprint ridges or formations. So now let's define what is principle of permanency or the constancy of or immutability. It is the state that the friction ridge, once fully developed, its arrangement will remain the same throughout man's life. So, but the question is, kailan nga ba nagsisimula or nag-i-start ang fingerprint ng isang tao? So, the answer is during the 3rd or the 4th months of the fetus life while we are in the womb of our mother. So, nung nasa sinapupunan pa lang tayo ng ating mga magulang or ng ating nanay, na-form na ang ating mga fingerprint ridges. And remember na habang nabubuhay ka sa mundong ito, hindi mawawala ang fingerprint or friction ridge ng isang tao. And while you are still kicking in this planet, well, it will never change. And remember that it will just change and disappear if the body of a person is in the stage of decomposition. Kasi your body eaten by the bacteria and some other bacteria that will make your body decompose. So, the more na malikot ka sa womb ng iyong mother, doon din nagpo-form ang mga friction ridges mo or yung fingerprint mo. So, we always remember that. Again, the 3 principles of fingerprints. We have the fingerprint or the principle of individuality, wherein there are no 2 persons to have the same fingerprints. We are unique in our own way through our fingerprint examination, fingerprint ridges or formations. Next, we have the principle of infallibility, wherein hindi nagkakamali ang fingerprint when it terms to personal identification. And lastly, the principle of permanency, wherein kahit ikat mo pa yan ng knife ang kamay mo or sugatan mo, still babalik at babalik din yung mga fingerprint formations or ridges mo. At this point, I will share with you some cases wherein they use the fingerprint as personal identification or identifying a person. So we have Lucela Lalu, who was the first Filipina that was chop and identified through fingerprint. And we also have Elsa Castillo, or the second lady who victim of a chop gang. So these 2 young lady or these 2 victims was chopped, and because of that they cannot be identified immediately, but still they used fingerprint in order to identify these 2 victims of chop modus. So I have also one case wherein he used different or other way in removing his fingerprint or friction ridges. So we have the John Herbert Dillinger, or was known as the U.S. Public Enemy number 1, who attempted to destroy his fingerprints using corrosive acid. So imagine, he used acids in order to remove his friction ridges. But sadly, he failed to remove his fingerprint. And do you know why? Because although it removes for several weeks, but it will still return. So kahit nasunog pa yung kamay niya sa asido, but still bumalik pa rin yung friction ridges niya. At kaya pala bumabalik ang ating mga friction skin because of that layer, such as generating layer, kung saan binabalik niya ang pattern ng ating fingerprint. And because he failed to remove his fingerprint, what he did is to have this facial surgery kung saan iniba niya ang kanyang muka. So that is his way in order to not identify agad-agad by the police officer or the law enforcement. He attempt to use acid to remove his fingerprint ridges or fingerprint formation, but still he failed because hindi niya alam, kahit nasunog yung mga kamay niya because of the acids, hindi niya alam na after several weeks, babalik at babalik din yung mga friction ridges natin, tutubo rin yun. Kaya what he did is to have this face surgical or surgery. Iniba niya yung kanyang itsura para hindi siya agad-agad matutuntun o makikilala ng mga otoridad. So, kung si John Dillinger uses acids to remove his fingerprints, we have also another case, which is Robert James Pitts or the Roscoe Pitts. Si James naman, siya naman ay nakulong sa bilangguan at kalaunan ay nakalaya rin. At sabi niya, habang siya ay nasa kulungan, kapag siya daw ay nakalaya, maghahanap siya ng doktor na kanyang or na kayang tanggalin ang kanyang fingerprint. So, imagine how desperate he is in order to change his fingerprint. Maghahanap siya ng doktor in order to or kayang mag-remove ng kanyang fingerprint. So, sa kanyang paghahanap, he met Dr. Leopold Brandenburg at siya mismo ang nag-opera kay James Spitz. Tinanggal niya ang skin, ang epidermis hanggang sa dermis at hanggang sa generating layer hanggang sa second joints at doon nga naging successful ang kanyang operations in removing James Spitz fingerprint. So, naging successful ang kanyang plano at according sa doktor, napakagaling ng kanyang doktor because he was able to remove James Spitz fingerprint or ridges. And because of that successful surgery, James Spitz was known as the man without a fingerprint. Once again, fingerprint is the most reliable method in personal identification. It's because, first, it is not expensive unlike to the DNA. Second, we can get the result of the test easily and faster, of course. And also, because of those three principles that I have been discussed earlier, again, which are the principle of individuality, infallibility, and permanency. And this ends my discussion. I hope you've learned something about my discussion for today. Thank you for listening. God bless us all and aim high.